Welcome to our discussion on the origins of a famed Christian creed. We're diving into something that challenges long-held assumptions about its history.
I'm really curious about this. The idea that a creed recited by millions might not be as ancient as we thought is, pretty wild.
Absolutely, it's like, rethinking your entire foundation. The argument here is that the so-called Apostles' Creed wasn't written by the apostles at all.
Yeah. So the claim is that this creed, which we assume has an untainted divine origin, might actually be the product of a much later historical period. Basically, a human artifact rather than a scriptural revelation.
Exactly, and the evidence is pretty compelling. There's no historical record of the apostles having seen or spoken these exact words. In fact, the first appearance of any version of it can be traced back to the late 2nd century.
That's over 100 years after Christ's time, isn't it?
Right. And not only that, it appears in a form known as the Old Roman symbol, which was essentially a baptismal confession used by the Church in Rome, rather than a universal, divinely authored document.
Yeah, that's astonishing. How did the modern form of the creed come about then?
Well, according to historical scholarship, it evolved over several centuries. The version we recite today only solidified after 390 CE and then continued to change, especially with influences from figures like Charlemagne in the 8th century.
Right. So, if I understand correctly, the creed was less about divine inspiration and more about political and communal consolidation?
Precisely. It wasn't exactly a revelation, but, more a tool, a sort of doctrinal hammer forged in the midst of controversies like Arianism and various heretical movements.
That's quite a shift in perspective. Why would the Church want to ascribe it directly to the apostles if they weren't the authors?
The reason seems to be, politics and control. At the time, there was a pressing need for a universal identifier, a short, easy-to-memorize statement of faith, to not just unify believers, but also exclude and define heretics. It's like a badge, a symbol of who belonged and who didn't.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's interesting because the creed itself doesn't really dive into Jesus' personal teachings, right? Like it outlines events, birth, suffering, crucifixion, resurrection, but skips over his ethical sermons and parables.
Exactly. It focuses on the theology of events rather than ethics or the actual content of Jesus' ministry. It's heavily centered on belief rather than behavior.
So it's like a timeline, almost a checklist of key moments, but it doesn't really capture the message of love, mercy, and, the ethics we usually associate with Jesus.
Right. It's almost like the creed was designed for memorability and enforcement of a basic orthodoxy rather than a deep spiritual narrative.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, there's a kind of irony here. The creed was meant to unite believers under a common doctrine, yet its origins raise serious questions about authenticity.
Exactly, and that tension can make some people question the very foundation of their faith. I mean, how do you react to the idea that something so ancient might be, a patchwork creation rather than a single divine truth?
It's definitely provocative. Some might argue that the power of the creed lies precisely in its repetition and utility, regardless of its origins. But isn't it a bit unsettling that it might have been crafted as a tool of exclusion rather than a simple statement of belief?
That's a great point, and it's worth challenging. I respectfully, think that while the creed did serve as a unifying tool, its origins, stemming from local liturgical formulas and evolving over centuries, do suggest that it was more about boundaries than genuine divine utterance.
I see what you mean. And isn't that the crux of the matter? The historical records show no direct link between the apostles and the creed's text. For example, we don't find it in the writings of Paul or even in the Didache, which were early documents of Christian teaching.
Exactly, and that lack of early textual evidence is very telling. It supports the notion that the creed was a later construction, emerging from a need to solidify and control a rapidly growing and diverse faith community.
And when you think about its later inclusion of lines like, "He descended into hell," which were added centuries later, and are still debated even among reformers like Calvin and Luther, it really underscores the fluidity of this document.
Absolutely. Those controversial lines, which some early manuscripts even omit, highlight that the creed wasn't set in stone from the beginning.
This raises a broader question about how we view historical and religious texts. If such a foundational piece of belief was developed and modified over time, should modern believers re-examine its authority?
That's a question that cuts to the core of why many are rethinking traditional narratives. I mean, it forces you to ask, what is the true nature of divine revelation? Is it an immutable truth handed down from the apostles, or is it, as some scholars suggest, a living text shaped by political and social forces?
Right, that's a deep one. But here's one thing that's got me wondering. Could we be overemphasizing the political agenda at the expense of the creed's spiritual resonance for many? Even if its origins were murky, couldn't the words still carry a kind of power?
That's a fair challenge. The power of the creed, as argued by some scholars like Dr. Robert Price, wasn't in its historical pedigree, but in how effectively it instilled a sense of unity and authority, even if that meant quelling inquiry.
It's kind of like, a cherished tradition that persists even when its origins are questioned, almost as if its repeated recitation gives it an aura of truth, regardless of where it was born.
Exactly, and that's the fascinating paradox. The usefulness of the creed as a tool, despite its inauthentic origins, shows that sometimes the power of belief can be separate from historical accuracy.
Certainly, yeah. And it reminds me of how many cultural traditions have layers added over time. It's like, maybe we should value the tradition for what it does in our community, rather than fixating solely on its origins.
That's a valid argument, but I think it's important to also acknowledge that understanding its historical context can empower believers to engage with their faith more critically. It's a double-edged sword. It unites, but it also limits
Yeah,
inquiry.
I get that. So, in essence, what we're seeing here is a transformation from a local Roman liturgical formula, a simple baptismal confession, into this grand statement of faith that's been used as a weapon against dissent.
Yes, and it evolved to meet the needs of an expanding, sometimes fractious church. Every adjustment, every new line added was a response to the challenges of the time, be it heresy, political fragmentation, or the simple need for a clear communal identity.
Absolutely. It kind of makes you think about how many other elements of our traditions might be similarly revised, doesn't it? A constant remix, rather than a fixed ancient truth.
Exactly. It's like an ongoing conversation through time. Each generation adds a verse to the chorus, sometimes for control, sometimes for clarity. And while that may diminish the purely divine claim, it also provides a rich tapestry of human endeavor in faith.
Before we wrap up, I'm still a bit unsettled by the notion that the creed's power comes mainly from repetition and authority, rather than content. Isn't there a risk of shutting down genuine inquiry by making faith a memorized ritual, rather than an engaged dialogue?
That's an important critique, and one that many scholars are grappling with. When a creed becomes a substitute for deeper theological exploration, it risks turning belief into dogma. It's a potent reminder to always ask questions, even of the traditions we hold dear.
It's fascinating, really. A historical artifact that evolved into a tool for identity and control, yet still resonates with millions today. It shows the complex interplay between faith, politics, and culture.
Absolutely. Whether you view it as an ancient truth or a fabricated faith, the Apostles' Creed remains a central piece of Western Christianity, with layers of meaning accumulated over centuries.
Right, exactly. And what an intriguing conversation this has been. It really pushes us to think deeper about tradition, belief, and the power of words in shaping community and authority.
For sure. The journey through history here reminds us that even the most revered texts have at their core human origins, crafted, revised, and yes, sometimes politicized.
Indeed. Well, thanks for this fascinating dive into the hidden history behind a creed so many recite without a second thought. It's been an eye-opening exchange, even if it leaves a few questions lingering.
Definitely, and it shows that whether divine or human, our traditions invite us to continually explore, question, and grow in our understanding. Thanks for joining the discussion.